Hello everyone and welcome to an incredible event that is the San Remo tournament of 1930. We have a very nice game between world reigning champion Alexander Alekhine and Savielly Tartakower, who, well, we could also say that was one of the leading players of the time. And if you look him up right now, you will see that Tartakower bears the title of Grandmaster, whereas Alekhine does not. And we already discussed this, but just in case someone is joining us, so you don't get confused if you Google it yourself. The Grandmaster title was officially introduced by FIDE in the year 1950, and at that time 27 of the world leading players received the Grandmaster title, but also players who were still alive in 1950 but were maybe at their peak in 1940 or in 1930, such as our good friend Savielly Tartakower here, and that's why he was also awarded the Grandmaster title. So if you search it, you might be thinking, okay, this Savielly guy was a Grandmaster, Alekhine was not. That could not be further from the actual strength levels. So don't get confused by that. Just wanted to get that out of the way. But other than that, Tartakower was an incredible player. He spoke many languages. He was considered a scholar, and also very interesting. He served in both world wars, which is if you want to play chess at that level, definitely takes its toll. Some great players, for example, did not fight in the war. Let's say the First World War, but their play was nowhere near their top level after the war ended. But okay. Like I said, an incredible player, and it's easy to maybe look at his results against other players, and then maybe we can, establish his actual strength. But even without doing that, he's doing incredibly well in this tournament. Alekhine, for example, this is round 8. Alekhine has 6 victories, and if you've been following the San Remo saga so far, those were 6 incredible victories, and the only draw Alekhine had was in round 6 against Spielmann, and Spielmann basically forced the draw in 20 moves with the white pieces. But Tartakower also undefeated. He has 2 victories, 5 draws, and now he has to face world champion Alexander Alekhine. In terms of strength, we could discuss, for example, his games against Rubinstein. Against Rubinstein, as like I said, I consider him one of the strongest players of that era. Basically the strongest one to never become world champion. Against Rubinstein, Tartakower has 11 losses, but he did beat Rubinstein 6 times, and 13 of the games ended with a draw. Only if we look at his games against the great Cuban, against Jose Raul Capablanca, against Capablanca he has 0 victories. So they played 14 games altogether. Capablanca won 5, but he did get 9 draws against Capablanca, also saying something about his playing strength. And against Alekhine, he did face him many times before this event, and he has defeated him once in Bad Pistian in 1922, where it cost Alekhine the tournament, as it usually does. Alekhine loses one game, it will cost him the tournament, but it meant that he finished second with Rudolf Spielmann, and Yefim Bogolyubov finished half a point ahead of them, and he won first place. That was Alekhine's only loss in that tournament, and like I said, cost him the first place. And it's hard to say if Alekhine held a grudge going into this game, for that event, but he has the white pieces. He's the world champion. He is, we could say, in an unstoppable form. So let's see what he produces in this one. And also, like the previous game that we've covered, this game is also featured in Alekhine's book, The Best Games of Alexander Alekhine. Previous game was game number 65 in his book. This game is number 63 in his book. So if you also have the book, you can also follow it. But I will also share some of Alekhine's comments regarding the game, as some ideas maybe in critical moments and in some less critical moments could be relevant to the analysis. So let's check it out. Alekhine with white opens with pawn to d4, and we have pawn to e6, going for the Horwitz defense, which means that this can now transpose into anything. You can play knight c3, you can play c4, you can even play e4, and then we go into pawn to d5, and we play a French. So it can be pretty much anything. Alekhine sticks with c4, and now we have pawn to f5, the classical variation of the Dutch defense, and pawn to g3. This is the most standard way of handling this, and it is by far the most played move even today in 2025 when I'm recording this video. We have knight to f6 and bishop to g2, and now bishop to e7 is the main move today. Bishop to b4 is the fourth most popular, but still considered the main line. So bishop to b4 check. We have knight to d2, and now castles here is again the standard way to play. You do not want to move the same piece twice in the opening, but Savielly prepared something special. He plays knight to e4, and this was already very rare even at the time this was played. Also, I forgot to mention sometimes Savielly in modern literature is also named Xavier, or there are even some other versions of his name, but in original it is Savielly. So knight e4, and now, well, again, Alekhine could play something like knight to f3, but he says that, okay, this is maybe a doubtful strategy, to say the least. In the spirit of the opening, castles would have been better, so he decides to challenge it right away. Pawn to a3, and we do have a trade. Knight captures on d2, and it is now officially, as of move 6, that this position has never been reached again. That's how rare this setup is. Bishop captures on d2, we have bishop captures, queen captures, and only now castles kingside. And now, while Alekhine could continue with something like knight to f3, and it seems like a very natural thing to do, he wants to keep the light square bishop as strong as it is, and he plays knight to h3, saying that the knight to h3 fights against black's main idea, and black's main idea is pawn to d6 followed by pawn to e5. What he means by this is that, let's say pawn to d6 is played, you castle, and let's say pawn to e5, let's say a trade happens, captures, now you play queen d5 check. That is the key move here, saying that you either win the e5 pawn or black has to trade queens. And if black trades queens, then you give a check, and after the king moves, you throw in a knight g5, and now it's a bit problematic. So it's playable, but very unpleasant. So, and we can even, Alekhine even continues the line. For example, c6, bishop to e6, captures, attacks the rook, and now, for example, rook f7, knight to d8, attacks the rook, puts pressure on the b7 pawn, and after rook d7, you claim the d file with rook a to d1, or even better, rook f to d1. And now it's very hard for black to develop, and Alekhine claims that in his hands, well, this is as good as winning. So after knight h3, we have pawn to d5, not going pawn to d6 and d5, and Alekhine says, okay, this is fine, it can be played, but it does weaken the dark squares quite a lot, and maybe we can take advantage of that. And while he does give a rook to c1 to maybe give a more complicated game, he plays c captures on d5. And again, one of those moments where Alekhine suggests a move that maybe keeps the game more complicated, and maybe that he should have played it. C captures on d5 is the top move recommended by the engine, the move that Alekhine played. So he captures on d5, and now knight to f4. As he says, the dark squares have been weakened, there is no pawn on e6 to be pushed to e5 at any moment, so the only pawn you have to worry about is g5, but this early on in the game, it would weaken the black king a bit too much. So pawn to c6, strengthening the center, and now you're basically fighting against Alekhine's strong light square bishop. So if you're able to avoid that, it's going to be fine. And we all know how that is taken care of. You will play b4, a4, and b5, and that way you're going to weaken black's pawn structure on the queen side and make your light square bishop a very strong piece. So we have castles kingside, queen to e7, and now pawn to b4. Alekhine says that this is a key move in the position. Not only does it gain more control over c5, not only are you preparing a4 and b5, but also the queen gains access to the a2 square. And this is why Alekhine is so strong tactically. He always finds these ideas that could result in some incredible positions later on. So we have pawn to a6, and now pawn to f3. Here, again, you could continue with pawn to a4, pawn to b5, but now Alekhine says pawn to f3, followed by pawn to e4 is the way to go, and that's how we open up this diagonal. So, okay, knight to d7. He says that without knight to d7, black's position is very difficult to play, but even if you don't play knight to d7, what do you play? So I would say this is one of those positions where the best move, it almost looks like the only move you can play. I mean, you're not going to play b5, you're not going to play a5, you're not going to play bishop d7, looks weird. So knight to d7 is the move that looks okay to be played. And now Alekhine could prepare the central push with rook to e1, but he goes pawn to e4 right away. So let's see what happens here. F captures on e4, we have F captures, D captures, and now queen to a2 with check. This is a pawn sacrifice from Alekhine, and he even he claims that he's almost sad that bishop captures on e4 doesn't work, but he does give the variation. Bishop captures on e4, queen captures rook a to e1, attacking the queen, where the queen is almost trapped if not for the f5 square. And after queen f5, knight to e6, putting pressure on the queen and on the rook on f8, queen to g6, knight captures on f8, and after knight captures, queen to a2 with check, and now after bishop to e6, attacking the queen, you can trade off everything. Rook captures on f8, rook captures, and now you can play either queen captures or rook captures, but basically it looks like white is winning here because there are so many nasty discoveries. Once you move the black queen, the problem is black queen comes to f7, blocks any incoming checks, and now you have to sort of double up on the e-file. You've equalized in material, and if anything, black will be a little bit better here due to the fact that he has 2 pawn islands, white has 3 pawn islands. And that's pretty much it. So, well, very interesting. It does not work. Alekhine calculates it precisely. He goes queen to a2 with check, king to h8, and now comes knight to e6. He says that he considered queen to e6, but after rook to e8, he just cannot justify, offering this queen trade. So he goes knight to e6. The knight is definitely a nuisance, to say the least. Rook captures on f1. We have rook captures on f1, and now knight to f6, threatening to capture the knight, and now knight back to g5, with some very nasty threats of maybe knight to f7 check, depending on what black plays. And also queen to f7 is looking like a pretty interesting idea in some lines. So what do you play here? There are many moves you can play, like the bishop can go pretty much anywhere, can go to d7, can go to g4, and this is all fine. You can even play pawn to g6, but in the game, Savielly decided to go pawn to h6. And while not a mistake in itself, Alekhine says that this allows for, for more space control if you're playing white here. And that's why he goes queen to f7. Queens get traded off. We have captures, coming with check, king to h7, and now knight to d6. And here it's very, very difficult again to find a move for black. You can't develop the bishop. The b7 pawn would hang. You can't really allow this pawn just to remain here. The pawn can be captured. So what do you play here? And the best move here that you probably should play is something like king to g6. And even though it seems like you can capture the pawn right away, it doesn't really do all that much. The king will become more active, and you will, for example, something like pawn to a5 will activate the rook, and you will have compensation for this. But here, Savielly plays bishop to e6. He decides to give up the b7 pawn in order to keep the e4 pawn, and maybe even for a possibility to advance it to e3. And Alekhine says that this is sort of overestimating the value of the central pawn. He does capture on b7. We have bishop to d5, and now rook to e1. Alekhine says that, okay, we could maybe consider some other moves like rook to c1, but he really wants to prevent this pawn from coming to e3. We have rook to a7, attacking the knight, knight to c5, and now how do you continue this with black? The a6 pawn is defended, but if in order for it to continue being defended, you have to keep the rook on a7, and that means this rook will not be a part of the game. So black's decision is very simple, pawn to a5. This will give Alekhine a passed pawn on the queen side, but it will also allow Savielly to activate his rook completely. We have bishop captures, rook captures, and pawn to a4. We have rook to a8. He wants to get the rook over to the b file to get it more active. And Alekhine plays rook to a1. We have rook to a5, saying, okay, if your plan is to advance the a pawn, I'm not allowing that. Simply rook to a5. And now, again, it's hard for Alekhine to find an active move, sort of a move that improves his position. But he does find it. He plays rook to a3, which keeps the rook on the a file, so you can't really just move that rook anywhere. And also, it guards the e3 square, preventing pawn to e3. And the real idea Savielly now has is to remaneuver the knight to the d6 square. But in order to do that, you have to keep the e4 pawn defended. So he plays king to g6. The idea being he wants to play king to f5, and then the knight will be able to move. With pawn to h3, Alekhine says, all right, if the king comes to f5, I want to have the option of getting rid of it with pawn to g4. King to f5, and now king to f2. And Alekhine says that well, Tartakower's position is already quite difficult to handle. Pretty much all of his pieces are unable to move, and but you know, regardless, that he should play pawn to h5. It looks like maybe an ugly move to play, but you should stop g4 at all cost. But Savielly plays knight to e8. He allows pawn to g4, expecting something that Alekhine also considered but decided against it. And it's very interesting. Look at this. Here we have a position where, okay, the pawn is no longer defended. You can definitely capture it and after playing g4. But the problem is after you play g4. Alekhine did not play it. After g4, let's say king to g5, you capture the pawn, knight captures an e4, the king comes to h4. It's a very, very active square for the king. Not only that, the black king is much more active than the white king, and if you ever move the knight, then the bishop will get traded off, the king will be stuck here, or the rook will be stuck here guarding that h3 pawn. So while you will be a pawn down, that king will be incredibly strong. So Alekhine does something that we've often heard Mikhail Tal say, that in order, you know, for your opponent to make a mistake, you have to allow him to make a mistake. And Alekhine plays bishop captures on e4. He even gives himself an exclamation mark, so we're gonna, you know, give one as well. Because it allows for black to make a mistake, to say the least. So here bishop captures on e4. Pawn to g4 with check, and now look at this. You can move the king to many different squares. You can play king to g5, you can play king to g6, you can play king to f6, you can play king to f4. So those are all very nice squares. Well, obviously f4 is not a very nice square. Knight to e6 is checkmate in one. But other than that, he did give him options, and he should definitely stick to his plan. King g5 and then bring the king over to h4. But he does not. He played king to f6, and now it's a completely different game. Look at this. Knight captures on e4 with check, king to e6, and now king to e3. We have knight to d6 offering a trade of knights, and now king to d3. Preparing to bring the king to c5 if the knight ever moves. So Savielly trades, knight captures, king captures, and now plays pawn to h5. And other than this pawn to h5 move, it's very hard for black to make a move. Remember, black is down a pawn, and that is the passed a pawn. And if you continue with something like king to d6, Alekhine says that after king to d3, it's going to be very, very hard for black to play this. For example, rook to e1, and even if the pawns get traded off, something like captures, king to c3, and he says that while black can still play this, it's very, very hard, and that he even defeated the great Capablanca in a similar endgame. So after king captures on e4, we have pawn to h5. This is the top move recommended by the engine, so you can Savielly definitely playing this at a very top level. And now pawn to g5. Again, Alekhine gives Savielly many possibilities to make a mistake here, and unfortunately, like I said in the previous videos, I do not have the clock time. So, you know, if I knew that Savielly was low on time here, it could, be a very, very important information for us, but I do not. And Alekhine wants to play pawn to h4 here. That is the idea. So the best way to counter g5 is to play pawn to h4 for black here. And then if, let's say, king to f4, you go after the pawn, king to d5. And this will be a draw. And on the other hand, if king to d6 and you allow white to play pawn to h4 and let's say king to e6, again, Alekhine would play something like rook to a1, and just after black depletes all of the moves, let's say king to e7, now it's very, very hard to stop king getting to c4, and later on, just stopping white. At a crucial point, you will be able to do something like move the rook, bring it over to f6, and then gobble up the king side pawns. The c6 pawn will be weak, and so on and so on. So after g5, Savielly decided to capture on g5, and this would work, except it doesn't. So it's the one move that he definitely should not have played. And if you just look at this position, it could look like, okay, what is this Savielly guy doing? Is he just a complete noob? Is he a beginner? Well, no, but Alekhine gave him 1 opportunity, 2 opportunities, 3 opportunities, and after giving him so many opportunities to make a mistake, he finally makes one, and that is the mistake. Rook captures on g5. So let's see what happens. Pawn to a5, we have rook to b5. Okay, pawn to a6, rook to b8, pawn to a7, and rook to a8. It seems like you've stopped the pawn and that you will be able to eliminate it in the future, or even if the rook moves from the a file, you will just capture it. So okay, for the moment you do have a passive rook. So what happens? Pawn to h4. Alekhine stops pawn to g5, or rather it seems like he stops pawn to g5, but without it you don't really have all that much to play. Problem is if you play something like king to d6. Look at this, king to f5, and okay, you will win this pawn, but let's say rook a4 stops this, and after c5 captures and captures, you go g6 and you gobble up all of the pawns and just win the game easily. So g5, Tartakower wants to create a pass pawn on the king side. We have h captures, pawn to h4, king to rook to a6 first. We have king to f7, and now king to f4. We have pawn to h3 and king to g3. We have king to g6, and now a very important move, pawn to d5, saying that you will not be able to capture my d5 pawn. King captures on g5, we have d captures on c6, king to f5, and now pawn to c7. And he was in this position on move 50 that Savielly Tartakower resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So 8 games behind Alekhine, 7 wins, 7 incredible wins, and 1 draw to Spielmann. Like we said, that one in round 6 where Spielmann had the white pieces. But other than that, Alekhine doing incredibly well. And Savielly was also undefeated prior to this game, but facing Alekhine will do that to you, especially if you have the black pieces. So it's hard to say if Alekhine was working really hard to beat him because of that loss we've mentioned where he got only 2nd place in the tournament, but he definitely did beat him. And here you resign because, well, after you make a move, white can capture, white can play pretty much anything, but a nice c8 queen is the most straightforward way to win the game. And now you have a rook and your opponent has nothing, you will capture that pawn, and then it's a completely winning game. So yeah, brilliant stuff by Alekhine as usual. He played it, he played it slow. He even played a line that maybe did not give him not even an equal position, but he even had to maybe allow Savielly to take a bit more than he should have. But he kept playing it. He was holding on, and he just allowed. He gave Savielly as many opportunities as possible for him to make a mistake, and in the end, he made one. Also, something that you can use, especially if you consider yourself to be a superior player than your opponent, you can use this strategy. If you're not stronger, it could backfire, but you should definitely use it as your goal is to become the stronger player. So yeah. We could also check out the standings. If you're just joining us, I do have the entire playlist of the San Remo tournament as I'm creating it, mostly from Alekhine's perspective, but we also covered a couple of other games, so will be the first link in the description below. And as you can see, Alekhine completely dominated the event, 14 out of 15. We check it out after every video I make on this tournament, but it is important, just to marvel at this. This is, imagine if you played a tournament or in any sport, like, if you're a darts player and you face the strongest players in your hometown, or maybe even in your street, and you defeat them by such a huge margin, you'd be a legend. And now imagine if you do that on the scale of the world elite. So yeah, definitely a strong player, and will continue until we finish the entire tournament. And for those of you maybe who are worried, but what about when you finally start an Alekhine saga? Will this not interfere with the Alekhine saga if you cover the tournament now? Well, no, because I make the sagas in a way that I cover the entire life of a player, or maybe the most important part of their chess life, up to the point where they become world champion. Alekhine is already world champion, so the San Remo tournament will never be a part of the Alekhine saga. That's why I've decided to do it. But yeah, Hope you enjoyed it. Very nicely played by Alekhine. Very much looking forward to all of the other games that he played in this event. I would like to thank Frank Banner, Brian Baker, Michael Santos, Ryan Knus, and Isaac Pinel Katadao for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.